James Cameron, his responsibility of fighting for his rights in black civil rights. Although James Cameron had many tough times in his life, he was an inspiration and leader for many people. He was thrown in jail and even survived a lynching attempt at age 16. But all through these events, he kept his faith for black civil rights by founding 3 chapters of the NAACP, creating the American Black Holocaust Museum in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and even participated in 2 civil rights marches with Reverend Jesse Jackson and the famous Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
And I said, no, I don't want to do that. I said, let me out of here. And they said, oh, say nothing to it. So all you got to do is just take a gun and put it on the people, say stick them up. And if they don't stick them up, you just shoot them, that's all. I go up to the car, and I open the car door, and I held the gun up like this, and I said, stick them up. And this man and this lady got out of the car, this white man and this white lady. When the guy got out of the car, I looked at him, and you know what? He was a friend of mine. He was a nice white fella who used to come down to a place where I shined shoes, and he'd tip me, and we'd always laugh and talk.
James Cameron was born on February 23, 1914, in La Crosse, Wisconsin. His parents, James Herbert Cameron and Vera Carter, were together until James was 7.
The sheriff came up, and he looked at me, and he looked at this other black boy, and he looked at that mob leader, and he said, these are nothing but boys. He said, besides, Cameron ain't in here, so you done hung 2 of them, so that ought to satisfy you. Then he turned around, he went back downstairs. And when he went back downstairs, the crowd said, Cameron is in there, and said, we want him. And then they began to chant for me like a football player. We want Cameron, we want Cameron, we want Cameron. And I thought I would die.
And then James's father left the family after becoming an alcoholic and lost his job. After his father had left the family, his mother filed a divorce and moved her and her family to Marion in northern central Indiana. James, his mother, and 2 sisters lived in a stable on the edge of Marion. In 1930, James was with his 2 friends, Thomas Shipp and Abram Smith, when they started to plot a murder. James wanted nothing to do with the idea, but he just followed. So on one night, his 2 friends handed him a gun and told him to rob and murder a couple parked on a street called Lover's Lane. He gave them the gun back and ran home, hearing gunshots behind him all the way home. 16-year-old James and Abraham Smith and Thomas Shipp were convicted of murder of Claude Dieter. They were all sentenced to death and were hanged. Thomas and Abram were victims of the lynching, but miraculously, James survived. In 1931, he was convicted in trial and served 4 years in state prison. After his time in prison, he then went to Detroit, Michigan. He found a job driving a truck for a laundry company, and on his route, he met Virginia Hamilton, who he married happily in 1938. They later on had 5 children, who also had very successful lives. He attended Wayne State University and worked at the Stroh Brewery Company. At Wayne State University, he studied to be a boiler engineer. And also, he loved studying and learning about race and civil rights. Throughout his life, he had many jobs, but mainly dedicated his work and life to promoting civil rights racial equality. During the 1940s, James founded 4 chapters of the NAACP, National Association of the Advancement of Colored People, which was founded on February 12, 1909. Today, the NAACP is the nation's oldest, largest, and most widely recognized grassroots-based civil rights organization in the world.
Well, that came about, my wife and I were traveling over in Israel, following the path of Christ. And I always did want to follow the path of Christ. So we were over there, and we got a chance to go into the Yad Vashem, the Jewish Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. And when I went in that Jerusalem Museum, tears flooded my eyes, and I couldn't see, because Hitler had done to the Jewish people what the white people were doing to us here in America. And when I came out there and composed myself, I said, honey, we need a museum like this in America to show what had happened to black people and the freedom-loving white people who've been trying to help us ever since we've been in this country. So that's where I got the idea. That was in 1979. I kept on fooling around with the idea and trying to rent a place to put my material I had. And it took me 9 years before I was able to get a place. I opened my museum June 19th, on Juneteenth Day, 1988, on a street called Martin Luther King Drive and Wright Street.
The first president of the NAACP Madison County chapter in Andersonville, Indiana. Additionally, from 1942 to 1950, he served as the Indiana State Director of Civil Liberties and investigated more than 25 civil rights incidents. In the 1950s, he planned to move to Canada because of the emotional toll of threats towards him, but instead, he decided on Milwaukee. Also, during the 1960s, he was lucky enough to participate in 2 marches with 2 amazing other gentlemen, whose names are Reverend Jesse Jackson and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. On the year 1982, he published his biography and many other articles throughout the years. For example, What is Racial Equality in American Life? A Time of Terror, 1914, and The Lingering Problem of Reconstruction in American Life, Black Suffrage. A Time of Terror is James' first account of him being arrested for murder of Claude Dieter and the attempted lynching of him in the town of Marion. Also, other books were written around this time involving lynchings and other black civil rights ideas, such as A Lynching in the Heartland by James H. Madison. This talks about the attempted lynching of James Cameron in Marion, Indiana, and the impact that this one lynching had on the entire black civil rights. A new step in his life was when he founded the American Black Holocaust Museum in 1988, after being inspired by a visit to the Yad Vashem Memorial in Israel. He bought a 12,000 square foot open gym from the city of Milwaukee for $1. Being aided by philanthropist Daniel Bader, Cameron collected materials such as slavery through lynchings and civil rights. Through the years, all of these materials he collected filled his museum. It has become more and more popular, and today, it has become one of the largest African American museums in the country. He was also pardoned of the lynching by the state of Indiana in 1991. Also, he returned to Marion and received the key to the city, as well as the key to his jail cell during the time of his lynching. In the end, James Cameron was a very inspirational civil rights activist who led and influenced many people throughout his life. He was a catalyst from the start of his life, fighting for a change and equality for all people.